welcome back to Strictly Come Hamster. I am one of your hosts today, Joe Ford, and I am immediately going to hand over to the more handsome, more charismatic, more intelligent, and completely underpaid host, Mr. Rod Brown. Hello,
Completely
Rod.
unprepared. Hey, Joe, I wondered who the hell you were talking about then. Hello, good evening. How are you?
I've just dashed in from dinner, so I'm a bit unprepared, but I'll be fine.
I'm sure you can wing it. And we're on our first classic discussion of the classic series tonight after two looks at the modern series. So that's very
it's
exciting.
about bloody time. We've
It
been
is,
talking
yeah.
about
So
all those
David
Stephen
Tennant is
Moffat
not going to win
stories.
this. Yeah, a very different podcast today. So yeah, thank you and welcome everyone to Strictly Come Hamster, which is the Doctor Who Championship podcast in which every 2 weeks Joe and I chasse our way across the Toymaker's dancing floor, accompanied by two very special guests. And together as a group, we're going to be ranking, congratulating, condemning, and reviewing a range of stories to decide which one's going to pick up the recursion glitter ball and who's going home to Pease Pottage. So let's meet today's very special guests. Gentlemen, would you like to introduce yourselves?
Who are we starting with?
Let's start with James. James is on the left to right.
Hello, I'm James, James Lark. What more information do you need?
Well, you've been on several of these before.
I'm proud to have appeared on various Hamster Book Club episodes, most recently discussing The Glorious Dead with Joe, which I believe has been a bit of a flash in the pan hit.
A triumph, I would say.
Any chance for Christmas #1, do you think, with that podcast?
No, the Goblins have got that one.
If we have a Christmas #1, I'm too scared someone's going to come at me with a shady tweet. Oh no, let's move on. Don't worry, you don't want to know. If you don't know, you don't want to know. All right.
Yeah. Moving swiftly on.
We've also got the man of 1,000 voices here.
The Mikey Atwood of podcasting.
Yeah, no, well, maybe about 10 voices. Hello, I'm John Bensahlia, and I've done a couple of commentaries with Joey. Pyramids of Mars, that was the latest one, wasn't it?
Pyramids of Mars, yeah.
Yeah, Web of Fear,
Yes.
City of Death, and the Unspeakable one, which...
The Doctor, the Widow, and the Wardrobe. That was our first. Yeah.
What a place to start. Well, today we are in classic series territory. So we are in season 17. Season 17. God, I'm losing the plot already. Season 11. I frightened everyone, did I? Could see everyone panic then for a minute. Thinking
panic. Have I been watching The Curse of Peladon for nothing?
Monster of Peladon. You've caught it off me, James.
Oh no. No, I did watch the Monster of Peladon.
You haven't done season 9, have you?
This could be a very interesting podcast. We're doing season 11. So John Pope is
season
final
11.
Season. Yes.
Well, series 11. No, I'm joking. Sorry, go on.
So before we get into talk about the individual stories, I think what'll be really interesting is just to talk generally about the series as a whole. And when did you first experience it? When did you first see it? How did you first see it? How did you feel about it then? How do you feel about it now? Just general kind of overview of your general feelings about the series. Let's start with the guests. Let's start with James.
Well, some of these I watched on VHS back in the day when Doctor Who was sort of like gold dust, but John Pertwee seemed to be everywhere. They kept repeating his stories on BBC Two, and for whatever reason, people seem to have a lot of his stuff. Everyone had Day of the Daleks when I was growing up, and so I think the first one that I borrowed was The Time Warrior. If it wasn't that, it was Planet of the Spiders, but I'm pretty sure that came later because that was a sort of double VHS, one of those big fat VHS boxes. But I was certainly in my teens and probably my early teens when I saw both of those stories. And I sort of caught up bit by bit. That I didn't watch Death to the Daleks until actually relatively late on. So it's quite a spread in terms of the order in which I experienced them. And last time I watched it, apart from kind of the last couple of weeks when I've been desperately revising, because I understand this is a very serious process that we're going to go through in a moment, I was in my marathon of Doctor Who, and at the time I considered season 11 about as complacent as Doctor Who had been so far.
Oh, ouch. Okay, interesting. I'm sure we will come to that when we come to the stories. John.
Well, the problem was, I was born 3 months after the last part of Planet of the Spiders, so I honestly don't know if I, managed to catch because they used to do Christmas repeats in the mid 70s. So I don't know if I would have caught the Christmas repeat. Maybe I did in my high chair and I was chowing down on Christmas turkey at 3 months old. But yeah, I mean, like James, I first experienced season 11 with the videos. So it would have been Death of the Daleks first, which was Christmas 1989. I remember my granddad, who was a big Doctor Who fan, he used to love it. And he was delighted that I got the present. So we watched that on Christmas Day instead of a movie. I forget what it was on that day. Planet of the Spiders, August 91. And again, it was one of those great big clunky VHS boxes that, you needed. You needed weight training to lug those around. I love those back home because it was so bloody heavy. So yes, I bought that. Yes, it was when I passed my GCSEs and I got done reasonably well-ish. So I got that. Then it was Monster of Peladon, which wasn't until quite a while later. I think it was 2003. I think it was. I think it was in an HMV sale back in the days when we used to go and, buy things from HMV. Then Invasion of the Dinosaurs, which was the single take video, and part one is in black and white, and it just looks weird. And ironically, and I've been searching for the video for so long, and I never found it. I used to go to every charity shop in the area, and I never found it. But when the Time Warrior finally came out on DVD in September 2007, I think it was, and that was when I finally got to see it. But I've got to say, I really like season 11. I think it's probably one of the most underrated seasons in the run. I think
we've got two quite diametrically opposed views there.
Yeah.
Well, I should say I have slightly revised my view on my rewatch of the last couple of weeks. I've had a great time watching it.
Okay, interesting. Joe, what about you?
Two of these I watched to death when I was very young. Time Warrior and Death to the Daleks. So people can tell me till they're blue in the face that the music in Death to the Daleks is terrible, and I still think it's one of the greatest pieces of music I've ever heard, and I know every single beat.
It's the Mr. Ben theme tune, isn't it? I'm sure it is.
People say that music when they come out of the ship is not scary. To me, aged 5 years old, it was terrifying. Planet of the Spiders, I came to really, really late. My mate Matt Dillon had the VHS copy of that, and he was always saying to me, "Oh, I'll lend it to you. Don't buy it. Say your mum save some money. I'll lend it," and he never did. So I didn't get that till it came out on DVD, which feels like much, much later than everything else. Monster of Peladon I got on video, and the tracking went on it, and I refused to buy another copy because it was so boring. I have revised my opinion on it a little bit, actually. So I'm still leaving my powder dry a little bit. I don't think it's entirely terrible, but and what's the other one? Oh, Invasion of the Dinosaurs. That was the last VHS release. But I first watched that.
Was it the last ever?
Yeah, it was the last.
No, it was Reign of Terror and the Web of Fear.
Oh, it was late though, wasn't it?
Yeah,
very late. Really
October 2003 it came out.
There was an occasion when UK Gold was broadcasting Doctor Who stories at sort of 7 o'clock in the morning or something. And I remember after a very drunk night out, I'd gone to Brighton, and I had an amazing shag, and I slept on the beach, and I got the first train home at 5 o'clock in the morning and watched Invasion of the Dinosaurs half cut. And it was amazing. I absolutely
best
loved
evening
it.
ever.
I'll tell you what, as a climax to that evening, you couldn't do better.
That's one for the obituaries, isn't it?
I agree with John. I think 11 is hugely undervalued. You can see where Barry and Terrence are looking at Moonbase 3 occasionally, but I think the stories are still pretty solid. I just think the team of the Third Doctor and Sarah is so refreshing, and I think it's Sarah Jane at her best in this season. So I think it's great.
Fine. I've realised, Joe, what my role on this podcast is going to be, and that's going to be the old man who says, "I remember watching this first time round," because I do.
Oh,
So I know it's very.
It didn't
sad,
matter so much with the new series, but now,
No,
yeah.
I know. I've realised that. I'm aging myself. So yeah, I was born in the ancient days of '66. So I was 7 when it started and 8 when it finished. So I have huge memories of watching this. I was absolutely besotted with Doctor Who from before I could speak, I think. So I have very, very clear memories of this. Time Warrior was the first time we had a colour TV, so it was the first Doctor Who series. I'd seen one episode at a friend's house in colour, and then nagged my parents incessantly to get a colour TV after that. So we had a colour TV from Time Warrior onwards. So that's really clear. I remember the Dinosaurs as being tremendous. Maybe I've revised my opinions on that a little bit, but at 7 they were absolutely terrifying. I remember being rooted to the spot. I remember absolutely breaking my heart when John Pertwee regenerated. And I do remember I was inconsolable, I think, for the entire night. I mean, it was just, the most traumatic thing that could happen to a child. And a neighbour very unusually came across the road that night. And I remember I was in floods of tears, and he was looking very oddly at me, wondering whether I was, a victim of child abuse. And I remember my parents kind of just looking very dismissively at saying, "Oh, Doctor Who's died. Don't worry about him. It's just Doctor Who," and push me in a corner. But yeah, I've just have loads of memories of the season going through. I loved it at the time. Probably revised my opinion a little bit since. I don't think it's the strongest of the Pertwee years, but there's still a lot of gold in there. Fabulous. So a couple of questions for you then before we go into the stories. Joe, Grant, or Sarah?
Oh, that's a toughie.
Oh, that's a good one.
Let's go to John first.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, they're both kind of different dynamics, so it's very kind of very hard to choose one or the other. With Joe, there's obviously that big friendship that John Pertwee and Katie Manning had, and that comes through in spades on their stories. But like Joey said, I really like the new dynamic between John Pertwee and Elizabeth Sladen. It's a little bit more grown up. I mean, Sarah Jane doesn't really say how high if Pertwee asks her to jump. There's a lot more kind of, just a slightly more mature relationship, I think. But and she's feisty, and she's independent, and she's pretty much everything that Joe wasn't. Really. Although having said that, Joe did become more independent in her last season. In season 10, she goes off and does her own thing. So I've completely crushed that argument after that. So that was a complete waste of time. But I'm going to duck out and say I think both of them. Sorry.
I'm going to come down on one side of the fence and say Sarah Jane Smith.
Ooh.
And this is one thing on which I have not revised my view, but one thing that seemed really clear to me on this rewatch. I've tended to assume that Sarah Jane really kind of came into her own as Tom Baker's companion and benefited from a change of doctor and a change of production team, and being a brilliant actress, Elizabeth Sladen was able to use all of those things to build this character. What was clear to me watching it back this time was how fully formed the character is. I would say in the performance more than the writing, I actually think she takes a few seeds in the way that the character is written and runs with them and builds this character that is much better in the realization than it maybe was on paper. And the other thing that was clear is how much this benefits John Pertwee's performance, which suddenly kind of finds a new lease of life in his final season, a new sense of humor, a new, as John says, it's slightly more adult. Certainly the relationship is slightly more adult. And there's something brilliant about the fact that she doesn't even really start out as a companion. She wanders into the TARDIS. For a couple of episodes, she's actually thinks she's fighting the Doctor, which is a master, comic masterstroke, but also gives her this amazing independence that she's creating relationships with a whole different set of characters and coming up with plans to defeat the Doctor. But she returns to Earth in Dinosaurs, and there's nothing saying that she's going to carry on traveling with him. That's not a done deal. And even in Death to the Daleks, it seems like it's a one-off trip. She's very reluctant to step in there. So she comes into the series as her own character with her own agenda, and I think that's does the series a world of good. Actually, I think she's incredible. I think she's really good in this season, and I think John Pertwee pulls it out of the bag. Sort of gives as good as he gets with her.
He's winding her up as soon as he knows who she is. He's like, "Oh, we need someone around here to make the coffee," and she's like, "If you think I'm going to spend my time making cups of coffee for you." It's a great report.
It's so lovely. And the way he sort of, whenever he looks at her in those first couple of stories, especially, it's with this wry grin, as if he's sort of enjoying watching her make these discoveries, and he's going to let her do it at her own pace, but he knows who's really in charge. It's lovely.
I love the bit in Planet of the Spiders as well, where she's trying to explain about all the stuff that's going on at the monastery. He ain't listened to a word of it, is he?
Yes.
They're so great together. It's almost like they're equals in a way that him and Joe never were. I mean, my answer is it's tough. I think in terms of chemistry, it's John Pertwee and Katie Manning. I just don't think their chemistry was bested in that era because they just adored each other. As a companion, it's Sarah Jane for sure, because she has the agency to actually drive the stories in this season in a way that Joe Grant possibly wouldn't if she wasn't being tied up or twisting her ankle or whatever's going on this week. Except, as John said, possibly in season 10, where she does do a bit of plot driving. So, no, I'm going to say Sarah as well.
Yeah, for me, kind of nostalgia drives me to say Joe. I mean, of all the companions throughout 60 years, Elizabeth Sladen is by far and away my favourite. But there's something about that nostalgia about Joe and John Pertwee, and it is different with Elizabeth Sladen. I mean, she's fantastic from that. She's so much more naturalistic. I think that's what makes it for me, that she's just all the little looks and the winks and the kind of body language that Elizabeth Sladen did, that just makes her feel like a rounded person as opposed to just acting a role. I just think she's magnificent. But the nostalgia factor probably brings me a little bit back to Joe, but it's so hard to choose between, isn't it?
I think you've got three brilliant companions in the Pertwee era, so choosing between them is tough.
And three very different companions as well.
Very. So I've got one more question for you. Whomobile, yay or nay?
Oh, God.
Yay.
Say yay. I like it. I think it's
perfect for John Pertwee's dog. Again, it wouldn't make any sense with. I mean, I can't imagine William Hartnell driving the Whomobile, can you? But
I would love to see that.
I could definitely imagine Troughton driving.
Joe is now imagining William Hartnell driving the Whomobile. So yeah, demonstrably you can imagine it. In fact,
picking up Jackie Hill on the way to rehearsals. Yeah,
I'm picturing it now. I think.
I mean, I'm the king of camp, but
it's just
that is
everything
camp,
about
it.
It is very camp.
So camp. Only Pertwee, yeah.
But then it makes me laugh that later on, John Pertwee, one of his famous anecdotes at conventions was he was always berating K9, saying, "Oh, it's too childish and too glib to have a robot dog." But he had a bloody alien car flying around. Like, not really sure he should be throwing stones for that.
It's insane as a car, but when it starts flying,
really badly
somewhere else, yeah.
You get the feeling Barry Letts said, "Oh, okay, John, it's your last series. We'll let you have this one. It
Whatever
really
you want."
Like, yeah, okay. We give up fighting with you. You can have it. We're leaving shortly." Brilliant. Thank you, chaps. Okay, so before we get into the stories, Joe, we've had loads of readers' comments about the season overall. So should we deal with some of those?
You do the first one.
Shall I kick off? Right. So Paul Eilert said it's my favourite Pertwee season, possibly because it has the amazing Sarah Jane Smith in it, but all the stories are incredibly strong. It's nice to move clearly away from the Doctor being stranded on Earth.
Interesting. Anthony Carroll says it's the worst Pertwee season. Sarah Jane is wonderful, and the Time Warrior, 6 episode stories are too slow. Well, that's indicative of the entire era, not just 11. But thank you, Anthony.
Mark Cochran, friend of the podcast, said the best bit of season 11 is the regeneration of the planets of spiders and the arrival of the best Doctor. So I think we know where Mark's loyalties are.
Gary Russell says the worst bit of season 11 is the regeneration in Planet of the Spiders and the departure of the best Doctor.
Yeah. So I think we've got two very different. I think it's becoming quite clear that this season definitely divides people. Daniel Knight said it's regarded as the poor relation of the 5 Pertwee seasons, but I enjoy it. Dinosaurs and Monster are better than their reputation. Death has great nostalgia value, and The Time Warrior is great despite Alan Bromley's uninspired direction.
Oh, we need to talk about that. I want to dispel that myth. Dave Rennie says season 11 is very underrated. It introduces the marvelous Elizabeth Sladen and has some bangers. He's not talking about Elizabeth Sladen there, is he?
Let's hope not.
Oh, I certainly hope not.
There's probably more Katie Manning, but let's draw a veil over that one swiftly. Paul Quinn said a super season which doesn't always receive the love it deserves, presumably because of the received wisdom that Delgado's death prompted an exodus, marking the end of an era. And didn't Pertwee want to stay but outpriced himself? There's a lot to be said for seeing how they managed without Delgado in a run of stories that continue the reduction of unit that began in season 10. Weirdly and simultaneously an echo and the reverse of season 7.
Always a smart chap.
But it's a good point, actually, isn't it? Do we miss Delgado in this last series? Because there was, I mean, we all know the story that, it was written as that the final game was supposed to be the end of Pertwee with the Doctor and the Master in big climactic confrontation. But do we miss him?
No, I don't think we do, and I think it has to do with this new companion dynamic. Actually, I think that, as I said, John Pertwee's playing it with slightly more of a sense of humor than ever before. I think it's a little bit like he knows it's his last season. I don't know when he did the deal or when he made the decision, but it feels a little bit like he's decided to have a bit of fun on his way out. And I'm not sure how that would have worked with the Master in the dynamic, but actually the fact that the stories are all kind of self-contained, I think adds to that slightly kind of holiday atmosphere to the whole thing.
And also kind of feels a little bit like a soft reboot. You've got, a new companion. You've also got new titles. And it just kind of feels like it's kind of resetting the button a little bit. So I don't know. I mean, obviously, we don't have the greatest Master anymore, which is a shame. But it does kind of feel like it's on a new course, I think.
I think it's very strange that Sarah Jane misses out on the Master, both sides of her era, by a couple of stories. He bows out just before she starts, and he's back just after she leaves. Melvin Pena says this is a blockbuster season for Pertwee's final bite of the apple, especially with Precious Liz in to manage the transition.
Jason Thompson, who's on our last podcast, said the season as a whole really changed in my estimation when I did my first marathon, watching 1 or 2 episodes a night. The 6-parters are a chore to sit through in one go. It's not the first time that's been said, but spread out as intended. Let's not forget they work really well.
The intriguingly named Mighty Meep says it's not my favorite Pertwee season, but I still enjoy it a lot. There's so much going on. Sarah instantly having great chemistry with the Doctor, Yates's betrayal and dealing with trauma, a humbler Doctor accepting the need to pay for his adventurousness, an excellent character study.
Big Orange Michael said it's easy to say that Pertwee isn't as engaged, but that really comes later on in the season after Death to the Daleks, where he seems a bit bored at times.
Where are these names coming from? Lim King the 8th says, outstanding. I was never a huge fan of Pertwee's Doctor, but rewatched the whole run during COVID and fell in love with his stuff. Whilst not quite hitting the peaks of Tom's era, they are stories I come back to most often. Proper comfort blanket stuff. I agree with that.
Darren said, it's a great season. Death to the Daleks and Time Warrior were early VHS releases, so some of my first Pertwee experiences and very nostalgic.
Paul Smythe says, season 11 is a bit hit and miss for me, a bit like the Pertwee era as a whole. Ooh.
Eric White said, one of my earliest memories, lots of great stuff.
And finally, for you very patient gentlemen watching, Meltham Rob says, I must be rare as I actually enjoy all the stories from that season. I don't have a favourite or a least favourite. I'll happily watch any of them.
Fantastic. And doesn't lead us neatly on to round 1 of tonight's show. So in round one is our knockout round. So what we're going to do is we've got 5 stories. We're all going to pick one story and then we'll argue over who's going to do the final one. But each of us is going to pick one story. And in time-honored hamster tradition, we're going to give 3 reasons why it should either stay in the competition, or you can give 3 reasons why it can be knocked out. And your job is to persuade and cajole the rest of us to your way of thinking. So let's start. I think it's only fair that we start with our guests. So, John, James, who feels the most passionate about either defending or defaming one of the stories from season 11?
Oh, well, I like them all. Even Monster of Peladon, I think, has got lots of.
Well, you've got 5 to choose from then.
Go on then, John. You've.
Oh, right. Okay. Well, I'm going to pick my favourite one of the season, which is Invasion of the Dinosaurs. And I think it's probably one of the most underrated adventures. And for years, it would get like 2 out of 10 scores in like I think it's the official handbook. Both the reviewers give it 2 out of 10, which I think is mad. Yeah, okay, the dinosaurs look crap. There's no way they pass muster today. But if you're really watching Doctor Who for the effects, then you're watching the wrong show. And I think the script is just absolutely superb. And I think it's really structured well. I think it's directed well as well. I think if you ignore the visual, the dinosaurs, the rest of the visuals actually look superb. I think all that creepy, empty location work in part 1, which Paddy Russell, I think, she filmed 3 weeks before. She and a cameraman went in a car and drove around London, and she got these establishing shots, and she really got her money's worth, I think. And it's also got a great cast as well. It's got some really good guest actors. It's got Peter Miles, John Bennett, Edith from Allo. God, what's her
Carmen
name?
Silvera.
Carmen Silvera.
Yeah, sorry. My brain is fried. And one thing that I really enjoy is it kind of takes away the coziness of the unit era by making Mike Yates a traitor. I mean, the Richard Franklin says he's not a traitor, but he is a traitor. He sells out to unit. And I think that is a brilliant twist. And it's quite. I think it's actually quite daring for the period. I think it's actually, them trying to do something a little bit different with the format, and I think it really works. So, yeah, I think there's a whole load of reasons why you can enjoy this.
Fantastic. Well, thank you for that. Let's go in and see what some of our listeners had to say about. We had loads of comments about Invasion of the Dinosaurs. It's really interesting. Some of these stories had very few comments, and some have had slews of comments. In Invasion of the Dinosaurs, we had loads. So let's start with those. So Cy Hart said Dinosaurs is best of the season without a doubt. Great plot. Sarah Lee's her own story. The dinosaurs are okay, not as bad as made out. And Pertwee bashes a pterodactyl with a mop. Yates' story is so good too. The unthinkable happening. The first episode is really strong.
Tony Filer, as one line, he says, Dinosaurs is a cracking story with some dodgy plastic beasties.
James H said, unlike the puppets, this story has balls.
Oh.
Not always successful, but it definitely has ambition and multiple plots.
David Gillespie Pratt says, ignore the puppets and it's a great story, unworthy of its reputation. The cliffhanger where Sarah wakes up on the spaceship is a series best. Also, it has one of the heroes turned traitor, as John just said, which Doctor Who doesn't do all that often and takes guts.
Lovely Lucy McCall says she loves that Sarah Jane has her own plot on the spaceship. She also loves the dynamic between her and the Doctor, the twist and the turns of the plots, with Yates' betrayal and Benson's loyalty. She likes the dinosaurs. Okay, so we've got a first vote for the dinosaurs, but Lucy points out they're not the real threat, the humans are, and they're truly scary, especially Carmen Silvera's Ruth.
Jason Thompson has not scrimped on the detail, as usual, and says, I curse Receive Fan Wyndham for making me put off seeing this until I got a VHS release. I loved it. The dinosaurs are generally rubbish, sure, although the scenes of the T-Rex waking up in the hangar are also pretty good, all things considered. but the story around them is great. It also has a top Benton moment where he could pretend the Doctor overpowered him and the brig would believe it, but he doesn't. He lets the Doctor actually overpower him. That's loyalty.
Michael Storm said Invasion would have been top, but there are enough petty annoyances to keep it off. The Dinosaurs not being any one of them. I wonder what his annoyances were, but maybe we'll pick that up when we discuss it in a minute.
Anthony Carroll, to base a show on dinosaurs that don't work is shoddy.
Don't mince your words, Anthony. Jeff Richardson said, best purely for the enemy of the world subplot and Sarah's quest to expose the secret.
It's a wonderful cookie. Says, for me, Invasion of the Dinosaurs is not only the best of season 11, but an all-time top 10er. I'm noticing a positive trend here. Beautifully written, maybe the best first episode in all of Who. Beautiful stuff.
John Llewellyn said very simply, awesome, great story and direction.
And finally, Mark Donoghue. Dinosaurs would be hailed as a classic if it had good monster effects. Fingers crossed for the Blu-ray.
So, obviously, John has lobbied us heavily for including and keeping dinosaurs in. So what do we think as a panel? James, let's come to you first. Is it a yay or a nay? Are you agreeing with John or not?
I agree with everything that has been said about dinosaurs. I think in terms of pure enjoyment, it's one of the ones in this. It's probably my favorite in the season to watch. I think everything that's good about it is not done as well as it could be or should be. And that's where I mentioned complacency. And I just think there's so much about Invasion of the Dinosaurs that we've seen better done elsewhere. The first episode, I'm an absolute sucker for deserted London stories. Dalek Invasion of Earth, first episode. It's very atmospherically filmed, but they bungle it. Halfway through the episode, they suddenly cut to a scene with UNIT in, and all this mystery, that's this dread, this horror, this unknown is destroyed in a single scene because we're suddenly with UNIT. It's like, oh, it's an emergency and UNIT in control. They should absolutely have seen the whole episode from the Doctor and Sarah's point of view. They should not have left on. There's an episode of the Avengers called The Morning After, which is not London, it's St Albans, but they managed to keep about 25-30 minutes of the episode going without giving away any of the story, which is just as well, because when the story arrives, it's actually not that good. But it's all atmosphere. I mean, that can be said about a lot of Avengers episodes. It's a great episode because it's so it builds up so much tension by not showing, by just showing images of things happening and you don't know what's going on. Invasion of the Dinosaurs could have been like that. I would also cite the brilliant cliffhanger to episode 3 where Sarah is on a spaceship and suddenly it's like she's been on a spaceship for 3 months. The very next scene in episode 4, we're back with UNIT, and it's absolutely clear from that moment on that she hasn't been in a spaceship for 3 months. She can't have been, because scenes are carrying on from where we were last week. Even Mike Yates, and I think it's brilliant that Mike Yates is a traitor, and yes, he's a traitor. And I think there's the potential for something so profoundly good there. And Richard Franklin plays it really well. There's this hint that the events of the Green Death caused a kind of breakdown, and he does that really in his. It's a single line, I think. He delivers that all in his performance, but he never gets to justify his position. And what little he says about it is so kind of badly argued. You kind of think, well, has he just kind of had a breakdown? And actually, there was the potential for him to be the idealist that Mike Yates was from day one and really capitalize on that aspect of his character. He doesn't get a proper send-off. He pulls a gun on the Doctor and he gets taken out. And I really feel to do that kind of level of character development and then not deliver on it properly is a great crime. So I love Dinosaurs, but I feel like so much of it is slightly rehashing former glories. I love the scenes of Pertwee in the Jeep. I love the scenes where he's, running around the streets on his own, but we've seen it all done better in earlier Pertwee stories. A lot of the action sequences feel like a kind of a last gasp, a harking back to the Havoc days, and not quite doing it as well. Sorry to be down on it.
But are you keeping it in though, even so, despite those niggles?
Yeah, let's keep it in.
Fabulous. It's really interesting hearing you talk there, James, because the first 2 reasons I had for keeping this in was episode 1 and the episode 3 cliffhanger. So really similar to what you were saying there. But episode 1, I absolutely got and I've written down something very similar to what you said about the kind of halfway jolt. the beginning of episode 1 feels like we're going back to season 7 a little bit. It's got that grittiness and earthiness to it. You've got looters and, you know, Renaults being revved like the Sweeney. It doesn't feel like the kind of cozy power stations that we've seen in the intervening unit years.
It's quite refreshing late on.
It is. It feels like it's got that grittiness again. And then, as you're absolutely right, you go back to the cozy unit. Well. Sorry, John.
You got the bloody corpse of the looter as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah. You don't see that sort of thing very often.
From the first shot from that playground and the abandoned toys, it's got some really stylish direction in there.
And even the dog sniffing at the car, it's got almost like a survivor's feel to it, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
And it has got that grittiness. So I was the same as you, kind of rewatching it now through kind of adult eyes. I felt a sense of disappointment when we went to the cozy unit setup, and it just felt like, oh, you're showing your hand a little bit too early. And even revealing
just
the
needed to come in part 2, didn't they? Just have that whole first episode.
Exactly. And don't show the T-Rex as good or bad as he is until the cliffhanger.
Glorious.
Show him.
Absolutely, leave it. Why you put 3 minutes before the cliffhanger?
Exactly. When he's just bursting through a building.
I fucking love that bit.
There are some, but episode 1 is still a great episode. Episode 3 cliffhanger is still, I kind of had a slightly different takeaway, and maybe it's looking at through kind of modern eyes, although as a child I didn't get it, but I probably wouldn't at 7. But I think the fact that we're still seeing Sarah on the ship and Unit now, I think we're used to seeing stories happening in different times. So that doesn't necessarily kill that little bit for me. And I think that works really well. And it introduces us to a new set of characters that otherwise we're not going to get. And the other thing I want to say is they're just great characters in this. We have got probably one traitor too many. I think we get
at least one too many.
They're
all traitors.
We get Yates revealed in 2. We get Grover revealed in 3. We get Finch revealed in 4. But what they do quite cleverly then in 5 is they make you think the brig might be a traitor too.
Yeah.
I think that's quite clever because we've had that run and suddenly there's that question mark: is the Brigadier also a traitor? So that's quite nice, and I like that in episode 5. I'm keeping it in. I think it's got Hulk's typical. It's not black or white one way or the other. I think he's got sympathy on both sides, and the Doctor even says that he sympathizes and empathizes with what Mike's saying, but not the way he's going about it. And the messaging was pretty on the nose long before Orphan 55.
I was just going to say that, this is the Doctor staring out the screen, giving an environmental message at the end of it. And weirdly enough, people don't seem to have an issue when it's John Pertwee doing it, but they do when it's Jodie Whittaker, which is curious. I really like the fact that it's left-wing villains in this, because I think, Malcolm Hulke is left-wing, and it would be obvious for him to go in the other direction. And by all accounts, he'd rub shoulders with some pretty extreme left-wingers, and he puts them right at the heart of the story, which is quite a bold thing to do. I like the environmental message. I don't think we get enough of it, if I'm honest, and I think it is reminding us to do the right things. Here we are in 2023 and we're still not doing the right thing, so I don't think anybody paid attention, but never mind. Sarah has a brilliant role in this. The only beat I don't like is when she goes into that lift with Sir Charles Grover, who's so clearly a villain at this point, and you just want to scream her out the telly. But for about 2 episodes, she is doing her own thing. They basically told her to go run along and play, and she sort of drives the story in another direction, which is really refreshing. You just wouldn't get it with Joe. And despite the fact we cut to Unit, I really love the direction of the first episode. I think the first 10 minutes has some really potent imagery. It's like the movie 28 Days Later done on, 100th of the budget. And I don't know who said about black and white earlier. I think it works better in black and white.
Oh, it's brilliant in black and white. I loved
really
it.
Gritty.
And and unfortunately, the recolorization is. I mean, I just think the quality of the material is so poor. It's hard to make that look. It doesn't match the rest of the story. They should have left it.
I also love the Doctor being on the run later in the story. I'm not sure that's as directed as tensely as it could be. It feels a little bit laborious.
It's a bit 10 minutes of padding.
But the idea of the Doctor being on the run from Unit
good
is a great idea. Yeah. I like when he's going in and out of that warehouse, all the broken windows.
And also the music. I think the Dudley Simpson score for this, I think it's actually one of my all-time favourite music scores of Doctor Who. I think it's wonderful.
This could be the ultimate sort of Renaissance story where perceived fan wisdom said this was a dog, and a lot of people have watched it in later years and found that there's so much to enjoy. So yeah, I'm absolutely keeping this in. It's probably my second favorite of the year.
And can I just call one moment, because I think it just shows what an amazing actress Elizabeth Sladen is. So it's the minute where she's going to prove to Mark that they're not on a spaceship, and she goes to open the doors, and she says, you know, we're not in space. We're definitely not in space. And she goes to open the door, and she opens the door, and she sees this corridor, and the look on her face, you know, she
Yeah.
wasn't 100% confident that she was right, even though she was convincing him, and just the look of the smile of relief on her face when she thinks, shit, thank God I was right. I've not got sucked out into space. But that's just such a classy bit of acting, I think, from Elizabeth Sladen, that it's, she's incredible.
There's an even better bit of acting than that, you know, Rod. It's the bit where that dinosaur, that Tyrannosaurus Rex, wakes up in the hangar, and she's got to convince us it's the most terrifying thing she's ever faced, and she's at that door, desperately trying to get out, and it's that model puppet that she's. I mean, do you know what? When I first watched it, I was genuinely anxious for her, despite knowing that that was a 2-inch puppet that she was running away from. So, bravo, Elizabeth Sladen.
So we are definitely keeping Invasion of the Dinosaurs in for round
Can
two.
we put the commentary track in the bin though? Because it's just Paddy Russell going.
I've spoken to Toby about that. He said it was the most pained professional experience of his life.
Yeah, I mean, hats off to Toby Haydock, because the man, you know, his patience is just amazing. You know, putting up with these one-word answers, and he's working so hard to actually try and make this commentary track as interesting as possible. But Paddy Russell just will not give an inch.
It is
excellent.
I can't listen to that one, John.
No, I can't. No.
So Dinosaur stays in. So James, we're over to you for your choice to either keep or condemn.
Well, I find myself in a position I never expected to, which is I'm going to defend Monster of Peladon.
What?
Because I sense that it's a bit of an underdog, and I reckon in terms of consistency, objectively, I think it's one of the best in this season, and I think it's got an awful lot going for it. I would flag up the way it's paced, which, unlike Dinosaurs, another 6-parter, which sort of keeps aloft by just chucking everything at every episode. I mean, Dinosaurs is never dull because every episode is doing something different, but it's a little bit relentless, and it's a little bit facing in lots of different directions at once. Curse of Peladon has got a really focused idea, and it sustains it for 6 episodes. It knows when to bring out the Ice Warriors. It doesn't do it at the end of episode 1. It does it at the end of episode 3. So it ups the ante right at the point where the story needs it. And it keeps doing new things. It saves an awful lot of things for the final episode. It doesn't feel like a story that resolves too early. It unfolds at a really elegant pace. I think it's nicely directed. I think we have to bear in mind that this is one of the talky ones. It's people in a series of rooms talking, and given that fact, it's got a really dynamic feel. Actually, it's got an awful lot of movement. It's got a lot of people kind of moving in a very exciting way through very, very tiny sets, and it doesn't ever feel claustrophobic, or unless that's the intention. It doesn't feel like these. I mean, you know, the palace room, the throne room must have been a tiny set, but and they cram a lot of actors in there, but it never feels like it's not as opulent as it's meant to feel. And those scenes in the mines, you know, they're just caves, and Doctor Who often doesn't do cave scenes terribly well. You know, you need a Graham Harper to work out how to do that, but actually the scenes with the miners are pretty convincing. There's a few scenes on film, and yeah, I know that we get to see Terry Walsh in a silly wig looking at the camera, but actually that is true of every single story in this season at one point or another. Most of the action is really kind of well filmed, and I would say that's a bit of a rarity in season 11. I don't think the action is terribly well handled usually. It seems to me that by being a little bit more intimate, this story gets it right. I'm going to flag up Dudley Simpson again. I think Dudley Simpson really comes into his own in this season. I think it's the point where Dudley Simpson goes, this is what I can do with this size of ensemble, and he writes epic scores. And again, he matches the scale of this. It's, you know, it's epic, but in a different way. It's epic in a sort of Shakespearean way. That's, you know, obviously setting myself up for a fool, because I'm aware that it's not Hamlet. But I sort of feel like it aspires to have that level of kind of intrigue, and Simpson gets this, and he manages to write a score that supports the dialogue really well. He's not just kind of supporting action, but he's world building. And I do feel like one of the strengths of Brian Hales's concept here is that he's building on a world that he's already set up, and he is developing it more. We see another cast of people. The myth is that this is kind of doing the miners' strike in the way that the Curse of Peladon did entry to the single market. I think that's completely wrong. I think this is a sequel to that concept. I think this is still all about the relationship to the Federation. It follows it up in a way that is not only compelling, you know, we're suddenly seeing the effects on that entry into the Federation on ordinary people, on working people, but it's really prescient. Imagine that they're not representing miners, but they're representing the fishing community, and suddenly we get to see it in a whole new light, and we suddenly see actually how it maybe is relevant to things that have happened even in the last few years. You know, this is obviously decades before the European Union, as it is now known, was formed in that way. And yet what you have here is a small splinter group of people who look as if they're official, arriving and trying to cast doubt on the benefits of the Federation using smoke and mirrors. And you've got the ruling class unable to articulate why the Federation is a good thing, because they're archaic and fundamentally kind of unable to communicate with the people they represent. I feel like we've seen a lot of these things happen in recent years. Hales really predicts an awful lot of what was going to happen down the road, and that is something that I think plays out with good characterization. We've the Queen is a weak character. I love that Sarah is there to tell her that being a woman, she comes from a society where she basically believes she is useless because she is a girl. She says it in as many words, and Sarah is there to say, no, that's not a reason. And we actually see that character go through a massive change through the story and step up to the mark in her role. I think we see this with a lot of the characters. It's very easy to kind of, again, sit back and watch 6 episodes worth, and it's all a bit samey, and we start to feel that they're cardboard cutouts. But they're not. Every character represents a slightly different response to this situation. I really, really like how when we finally get the reveal of the Ice Warriors, we're still not sure whether they are bad guys or good guys, because the previous Peladon story has told us that they can be the good guys. And we have sure, they're authoritarian and overreacting, but that could just be, an authority figure overstepping his mark. It's a while before the Doctor works out that they are actually bad guys and they're not representing the Federation at all. So I think this is a story with layers, and I would keep it in.
Fabulous. Well, I hate to say this, James, because as we'll come to in a minute, I was also going to champion it as an underdog, but our very few comments that were received on this from our listeners probably points in a different direction. James H said, should have been 4 parts, and that's all he's got to say.
Dave Rennie says, Peladon is just too long and has to be bottom of the season poll, despite the tremendous Pertwee green coat. And it's a fabulous coat he's wearing in this.
Yeah. Lovely Joe Short said, worst is Peladon because it's too long and dull.
Michael Donahue says, Peladon is a poor sequel with few good bits.
And Darren McKay said, worst favourite, sorry, Monster of Peladon, but you're just so very boring. And that's all we received on it. So, yeah, it was a bit of a damning indictment from the Hamster listeners. James, I think you've put up a very valid argument. We've now got to decide whether to agree with you. Let's start with John. John.
No, I agree. I agree 100% with everything that James said. I like the Monster of Peladon. I did one of those I think it's Metabilis, and it actually allows you to kind of put, rank all the stories in order of your preference. And Monster actually came higher than Curse for some odd reason. and I suspect it's probably to do with the whodunit kind of aspect, which I like. I mean, stick me in front of Midsummer Murders and I'll like it. So anything murder mystery like that, I think is great. And I think there is a lot to recommend. I think, like James said, the music is superb. I really like the kind of doomy synthesized howl that you get for the Ice Warriors.
Oh, as soon as he mentioned the music, I could hear that scream from the music.
Yeah, that really works well. Yeah, obviously there's a few things that don't quite land. Obviously the Terry Walsh doubling for John Pertwee. And more to the point, the cliffhanger to part 1, where Blore does this bizarre kind of noise like a little baby.
Ah!
Or something like that. And notably, they don't have that in the reprise, and I'm not surprised.
It's the look on his face, isn't it? Oh, shit. It's so funny.
But I like it a lot. I think it's got an awful lot to recommend it. And I think, by and large, the cast are very good. You've got Donald G. You got Alan Benyon. I think is very good as Skell.
He's great. He's really good. Yeah.
Very, very subtly different to, I want to say, Islier. Is it Islier?
Yeah, because he's very charming in Curse of Peladon.
Yeah. He's more obviously villainous, but he's a very subtle distinction.
But he's still playing the politics, isn't he?
He's playing a bureaucrat, isn't he?
Yeah. You've got Rex Robinson. Oh yes, the Badgerwigs are terrible. The Badgerwigs are just what is all that about? I mean,
they're a unique look, John.
Rex Robinson does have one of the worst lines in all of Doctor Who, though, doesn't he? What is it? If you can't stand the heat, stay out of the mine. I was like,
how Rex Robinson managed to keep a straight face. Ralph Watson he's enjoyably hammy. I mean, but he really does go quite over the top, doesn't he?
Well, he suddenly goes psychotic somewhere between episodes 2 and 3.
Yeah,
he's sort of quite calm at the beginning, and then he goes completely mad.
Yeah, I quite admire that, but I admire doing that in a badgerwig. Like those badgerwigs, those badgerwigs would have been embarrassing if the people wearing them had looked embarrassed, but they don't. They own the badgerwigs. I mean, I don't find that as embarrassing to watch as they might have been, as embarrassing as some costume decisions in Doctor Who, because they all believe in those parts. They're playing like they are burly miners, and you just sort of buy into the world, I think.
So, burly miners, I've got to move to Joe and ask him his thoughts on Monster of Peladon. That's a perfect segue for you, Joe.
No thoughts on it whatsoever. Thank you. I can't believe I'm going to say this, but you people are so compelling in your arguments. And I'm seeing what you're seeing, and I've never really liked this. Actually, the more I'm thinking about it, I'm thinking about like individual scenes that I love in this story. I love the end of the cliffhanger where Sarah opens the door and that ice warrior comes lurching out. I think that's an amazing cliffhanger. I love the bit where Sarah finds the Doctor after the alarm, that crazy gay alarm's been going off, all the rainbow lights coming off him. And she thinks he's dead, doesn't she? And the way she plays it, like she touches him and he comes alive and she's like, oh, it's so brilliantly acted. And best of all, super camp villain Eckersley, Donald G, back from his meteoric success in the Space Pirates. Apparently, by all accounts, someone said to him on a commentary, the Doctors only ever leave because you're in a story. They leave immediately in the next one, the actors. But no, he has a wonderful moment in episode 6 when he's finally revealed. I mean, he's in black leather. We sort of knew. And he's got the Queen. He's dragging her through all the tunnels. And she goes, there's all these bodies everywhere. She goes, look at what you've done. And he just goes, never mind, and just drags her off again. Oh, he's amazing. It's too long. I think this is too long. And I don't think it's as atmospheric as Curse of Peladon. I don't know if there's a different lighting designer. I think the mine really comes alive when it's on film, but it does look like a studio when it's on video. But no, I'm going to keep it in. I think it's really fun.
Fabulous.
And on fashion alone, Pertwee's coat, it's the best coat he ever had.
Well, my vote's superfluous then, but I'm also going to keep it in.
Bloody hell, everything's going through.
Well, A couple of reasons I like it. It's actually a proper sequel, and I don't think up to this stage we've had a proper sequel. We've had villains returning. We've had lots of villains returning, and people say, "Oh, Dalek Invasion Earth is a sequel to the Daleks." Well, no, it's not really. It's just the same adversaries come back again. It's not actually. We're not seeing the same
Web of
setting, the
Fear?
same characters. Well, sorry,
What about the Web of Fear?
Professor Travis.
Well, no, the Great Intelligence, the Yetis.
Yeah, maybe. But
Sorry, there's always some annoying arsehole pointing things out when you say things, isn't there?
but they're in different settings, Tibet and London Underground. Whereas
That's
here we've
fair.
actually got a return to the same planet. So Doctor Who always often, I mean, one of the cliches is he's the cowboy that rides into town, puts things right, and then leaves again, and we never see the consequences. Now, we're not necessarily seeing consequences here, but we are seeing him returning to the same, not necessarily the same time, it's 50 years later, isn't it? But the same place. And we've got Agador there still. We've still got Ice Warriors. We've got, of course, the Glorious. How can nobody have mentioned Alpha Centauri?
Alpha Centauri. Oh, good
I
grief.
mean, she, he, it is just glorious. So
really
yeah,
expressive. That struck me watching it. The way that head moves around, and the performance is really good.
yeah, it is.
I've not heard any gay MPs that sound like that, though, if I'm honest. That's apparently what you said Churchman was asked to play. Play it like a gay MP.
She does a damn good job. I think yeah, Alpha Centauri is a hero. And the only thing I will say, James, on the point you were making, kind of about the political relevance, I was growing up in this period. Okay, I was only 7, 8 at the time, but I was very aware that there was a lot of unrest out there. There was political upset. We had 3-day working weeks in the 72, 73. And the only reason I was very aware of those, because I was always absolutely petrified the Doctor Who might go off if there was a power strike on a Saturday. Thank God it never happened. I know it did for others. So I was very acutely aware that there were kind of 3-day strike. And I think this does kind of play into that. Okay, we've got miners, but we had so much civil unrest in those days. I think it does trade on what people were seeing in the country as a whole. And I think it does reflect that quite well. So that's another reason I'd keep it in. But yeah, I agree. I think it's a goodie.
Don't you think that's wonderful that the whole country's in like a period of civil unrest, and the greatest danger might be that Doctor Who isn't on Saturday?
Always.
How old were you then?
7, 8.
Oh, fair enough.
I was absolutely terrified Doctor Who wouldn't be on.
I'd have said fair enough if you'd have said 21. So yeah.
Probably was that too. Yeah. So yeah, let's keep it in.
I never thought that was going through in a million years. Well done, James.
So, Joe, it's down to you and I. Do you want to go next?
No, go on, you go next. I went first last time.
I'm going to go for then Planet of the Spiders. So the reasons, first of all, why I would put it in is because I think it's pretty much the epitome of the Let's Dicks era. I think we've got pretty much everything in one story, everything that they did really well. I mean, it's really telling that Barry Letts directed, wrote, and produced this. The only time in Doctor Who history that one person has taken all the lead roles in a show, and this is pretty much the summary. And episode 1 certainly is the kind of is a perfect summation of this era. We've got we trade on things that are in the zeitgeist at the time. So there's talk about ESP, which was very much a topic of debate at the time. And tomorrow, people on ITV were treading a similar path. We've got the meditation and self-help center, which again is feeding into that kind of thinking that was going on coming out of flower power from the 60s into the 70s. It was very much about meditation and Buddhism, obviously a major part of that. We've got the slow build up to the big reveal at the end of episode 1. You think something's going to transmat through on the carpet early on, and it doesn't, but then by the reveal we get the Great Spider, which, surprise surprise, is in the title, so I think we knew that was coming. We've got danger in ordinary places. We've got tractors suddenly appearing on country lanes. The great character beats in the first episode. I absolutely love the scene at the cabaret with the Doctor and the Brigadier, the way the Brigadier absolutely perks up when the exotic dancer comes on, and the way Pertwee looks at him.
He gives him a knowing eye that you
he
pervy
certainly
git,
does.
doesn't he?
But Courtney plays that so well. My God, he really sits up and I was waiting for him to get a pair of glass out and polish them. I mean, it was he was definitely interested in that part. And then again, we get Professor Clegg when he takes the watch and gets visions of Doris, and Corny again plays that beautifully. I don't think he's that kind of buffoon that we got a little bit in season 10. I think he's still a rounded character, but a lovely comedy beat for him. We've got Pertwee, he's in complete control of this story. There's lots of continuity. We see clips of Carnival of the Monsters. We got obviously all the references to Joe and Metabilis, not Metabolus 3. So I think we've pretty much got everything. We've got foreshadowing what's going to happen because Choji talks about the old man that dies. All of that's just in episode 1. And I think it really kind of encapsulates everything of the era. It does go a little bit downhill after that, and again, probably reflects things in the era. So we get some terrible CSO coming up. We get, as people have already mentioned, Terry Walsh in a terrible wig and seeing his face umpteen times getting thrown around the studio floor. We get some appalling acting, and Jenny Laird, step forward, please.
Rod, my husband, why? Oh,
so
You just
God,
think
it's
someone
awful.
no. I mean, it's
It
just
is.
like
I shan't let you defend this. I shan't.
Why, oh, why, oh, why? It's terrible, isn't it?
Also, why is Terry Walsh doing that? Terry Walsh
Walsh
turns up in that wig to do stuff that Pertwee could have done himself. He just sort of, it's not very dynamic. He just it's almost like Pertwee goes, well, they're shooting me from behind, so Terry can take this one. I'm off for a cup of tea.
I'm off for a fag, yeah. So okay, we get some crappy bits, but then it comes back again, and I think again we get some great bits. So growing up around lots of people who didn't like Doctor Who, they remembered some of the John Pertwee ones. They really stuck out. So everyone said, oh, I remember the one with the maggots. Oh, I remember the ones where the monsters came out of the sea. And this one was, oh, I remember the one with the big spiders jumping on people's backs. So had really memorable visuals, and I think that's a key to this. And again, that's a real stock in trade for Barry Letts and Terrance Dicks. So yeah, I think it sums up lots of what we know of that era and reflects it back, but then does some new stuff too. So my second reason for liking it is the characters. And what I really like about Plant Spiders, this is the regeneration story. This is the big climax of 5 years of John Pertwee. He's the biggest Doctor. He's in all the media constantly. And who are our main protagonists? They're a group of fairly seedy, rundown, middle-aged businessmen. I mean, it's such a juxtaposition. You are not expecting those to be your big bad. I don't think we see a similar group in any Who, actually. They're just quite real and just a little bit seedy and a little bit dirty and greasy and oily,
aren't they?
They're very pathetic, yeah. I mean, what is he? Lupton's a failed sales director, and he's just greasy and seedy, isn't he? He's like Leonard Roster from Rising Damp.
But he's got an anger to him as well.
Oh,
That's
has,
a bit
absolutely.
sinister.
Yeah, he's worrying. We also get Tommy, and Tommy doesn't get talked about enough. So again, sorry to hark back to childhood, but I went to a normal state primary school, and we had a girl in our class who had learning disabilities. Obviously, it wasn't called learning disabilities in those days. But including a character like Tommy in a regular show, not making a big fuss about the fact that he's got learning disabilities at all. He's just there. I think that's a fantastic way for children just to kind of accept, we're all different and there are people with differences out there, and it's part of life's rich tapestry. I feel slightly uncomfortable with the kind of magic resolution to his learning disabilities with the crystal later on. Although the line when he said something like, who wants to be normal? I thought that was lovely, but it's a little uncomfortably that he's magically made better. I suppose, do we need to mention the kind of uncomfortableness about Choji as well, and Campo being Tibetan, being played by English actors? There's a bit of, it's unusual that some stories get real kicking for racial misappropriation. This one doesn't, and it kind of teeters on the edge of that, but let's not get too drawn into that. So I think the characters are my second reason. And the third reason is the regeneration. It's, this is the first time we actually call it a regeneration. It's just huge for the show. I mean, John Pertwee Doctor Who was everywhere. It was headline news. It was in, my sister was 3 years older than me. It was in her teenage magazines, was Sarah Jane Smith and Elizabeth Slade and what she was wearing. So the regeneration was really, really big. And it's just different. He regenerates because of his greed of knowledge. So it's different the way it's done. And seeing John Pertwee really showing fear in episode 5 of The Great One, I think really leads into that fact that this is something momentous. And so, yeah, that I think it's not a big flashy regeneration. It's very subtle, very quick, but I think it does the job. So yeah, regeneration characters and the epitome of an era are the reasons I'm going to keep it in.
It's a death, isn't it? It's actually
Yeah,
the Doctor
absolutely.
dying for
Absolutely.
once, rather than something madly operatic happening. You actually just experience him expire.
Yes. And we feel it too.
Hmm. Comments?
I think it's
Oh,
probably the only one of the few regenerations that still brings a tear to my eye, or rather the build up to it when he says, how he has to face his fear, and when Sarah says, please don't die. Yeah, I mean, I cry at anything these days, but that one, it's a killer.
The regeneration, the whole scene has a stillness, a quietness,
Mm.
which I think is so effective. And I agree with everything you said, Rod. You've flagged up a lot of positives. You have omitted quite a lot from the end of episode 1 to the regeneration scene. And where I think Planet of the Spiders really falls down is in quite a lot of the stuff that happens in between. And however good episode 1 is, they've got to fill another 5 episodes with this stuff. And what they end up filling it with, eventually is a lot of people in stock costumes against a really bad CSO backdrop doing West Country accents.
We're all farmers,
We are all farmers. We're being very oppressed by these here 8 legs. Gareth Hunt in a gay moustache doing a West Country accent. Who'd have thought that 2 years later he'd be the poster boy for the new Avengers?
Ralph Arliss, though, James.
Actually, yeah, no, okay, yeah. He's having to do an awful lot of the work on his own, though, isn't he?
Oh, I wasn't talking about his acting.
No.
What were you talking about?
Oh, he's just very handsome.
He's very pretty, isn't he? And unlike many of the 2 legs, he can grow his own beard.
The beard stocks were in. Yeah, they were using quite a lot of them there. I think the only Doctor Who story that uses them more is State of Decay.
Well, we're doing season 18 next.
Oh,
so
we are.
Crikey, you want beards? You're full of beards in that.
I was watching this with that thought in mind of it being the kind of last hurrah for Letts and Dicks, and I'll even give the chase scene a pass. It's pretty drawn out, and it's not the most dynamic ever, but let him have his vehicles. Let him have his comedy policeman. I'm afraid my conclusion was that the last hurrah for Letts and Dicks is not Planet of the Spiders, it's Robot, where they actually revisit a lot of kind of their stock things, a lot of imagery from Spearhead from Space, and it's much pacier, much punchier, and I think better written. I think Planet of the Spiders has a gaping hole in the middle, and it's parts 3 to 5 and most of part 6. In fact, most of part 6 is part 5 anyway, because they obviously ran out of material and just had to repeat a load of part 5. So although you've put up a spirited defense, I don't think I can keep this one in.
Joe.
I really love Planet of the Spiders for a lot of the reasons that you've said. I'm going to say something that might sound a bit heinous, but I don't think Barry Letts is the strongest director, and I think he should have handed this to somebody else. I'm not sure he can pace very well. I think probably his best direction ever is his Enemy of the World. And I think he directs really well in Inferno because he's got a solid camera script by Douglas Camfield that's already prepared. But after that, and I love Carnival of Monsters, I think it's a really fun story. But he's really experimental, and I really love the fact that he pushes technology along. But in order to push technology along, you make some stumbles along the way. And Planet of the Spiders shows so many of those. The bit where Sarah appears on Metabelia's Free with all that dreadful fringing. It's just, you can't watch this with your family, can you? Under any circumstances. And like, I think episode 4, where they're in the weird cocoons. Like none of that's needed. And they're sort of in and out a lot. There's a lot of chasing around going on. You've got the farm boys coming in to rescue them. No, they're actually evil. It's all those Doctor Who tropes. I think you're right. One is a brilliant setup, and it sort of exemplifies the best of the era. And I think 6 bows out the era in a really surprisingly thoughtful and moving way. But I also think James is right. Everything that comes in between, including the chase, which I don't mind watching because it's fun and it's pacey and it's got Chubby Oates being campus hell, and like there's lots happening in it. It's really indulgent, and I just feel like
Really indulgent.
it could
Let's
be
just stop and have a chat in the middle of this chase scene.
it
Because
could
we've
be
got
a
to keep it going for a bit longer.
solid 4-parter. I think it could be an excellent 4-parter, but it is a pretty dreary 6-parter. So despite loving a lot of it, I'm voting it out.
Wow. Okay, so Spiders is going to be the first one that falls. We didn't do the comments actually, Joe.
Do you want to do them now and I can edit them in?
Let's do it now. Let's just do them now. Let's just do them now
Okay.
anyway. Let's keep things fresh. Michael Donahue said, Spiders is good, but too long. Oh, yeah, I think we've touched on that. It's a pity the planet was studio bound, although I like the idea of something finally scaring Pertwee and his arrogance and pride being his undoing. And unlike others, I like how simple the regeneration is.
Gareth Bowley says, a great romp of a story with a brilliant chase sequence. I've got a feeling they're all going to love it, you know.
Well, there are very few, actually. It's surprising compared to like Dinosaurs. Anthony Williams said everything John did was superb. Oceans of tears when he died at the end of Plants of Spiders.
And Eric White says Spider should have been a 4-partner. I think he means parter.
Parter, yeah.
Spider should have been a 4-parter. The edited version on the DVD is excellent. I've never seen that.
No, I can't say I have.
It's jarring. It's very jarring.
I think
mean,
when you're used to watching something,
Yeah,
and
I'm
bits are
used to the
taken
whole
out.
starts, and it instantly starts with a close up of the mandala. Is it the mandala? That little
Mantra?
map that they
Yeah.
have when they're
Mandala
summoning
mantra, yeah.
the spider thing. Can I just say I'll keep it in because I quite like Planet of the Spiders.
Go for it.
Come on, where's your defense? I thought
My
we'd done this
defense?
already,
Oh,
but
want
off
a
you go.
defense? Okay. All right. Well, yeah, I think the padding bit is valid because it's just like the cocoon bit. I mean, it's just really bad puns being thrown at each other. Sort of whether to stew a Time Lord or roast a Time Lord. Some of the CSO is dodgy, but I do like Barry Letz's ambition. Like that strange bit early in part 3 when Luxon kind of has that mental link with the spiders, and there's like this gurning disembodied head ends up in the spider courtroom, and it's just sort of going.
They filmed it from 2 angles, and they're
Yeah,
fading between
yeah,
2
they
angles,
did
so his face doesn't quite line up.
Yeah.
The problem is the effects have been so dodgy up to that point. You sit there wondering if it's just an accident.
Yeah.
It's the
He's
evil
just in the
queen,
next studio
isn't
and he's
it?
been accidentally
Yeah.
fed in.
It's the evil queen from Snow White. It's the same effect, isn't it?
It is, yeah, the sort of revolving head, yeah. And he does tend to roll his R's a bit, the crystal. It's every time it's just the crystal, it's always the crystal.
I love a hammy villain.
He is quite hammy, but I quite like the fact that he's such a loser. His only motivation is to get back at his old, the takeover boys who kicked him out of his old job. And he's so deluded with madness.
Do you think John Dirth? Is it John Dirth or John Darth?
It is John Dirth.
Dirth. I think he's brilliant.
Yeah,
I think he's really
yeah.
good in this. And that he looks tragic, doesn't he? He looks like a businessman who's just had a
jacket
bit
is
of bad
like
luck.
10 sizes too big for him. He's practically just sort of wasting away in that.
Even the fact that when he's delivering his backstory, the camera cuts away from him and shows us something else going on. It's like even the directors are not that interested in his story.
Like, I can't be bothered with this.
But did you notice as well? He's sort of washing his hands and his face in a really sort of aggressive way. There's something about him that's scary.
Yeah, I'm waiting for him to turn up on 24 Hours in Police Custody because he does definitely something. He's a bit of a wrong one, isn't he?
He'd be on Twitter 24 hours a day, constantly getting at everyone, wouldn't he? Twitter is tailor-made for Lupton.
In block capitals, yeah.
In block capitals, yes.
We won't say who he reminds us of.
But from everyone's laughter, we can assume they all know.
Yeah.
Oh dear, so I can't laugh. I've got a really bad sore throat.
Oh,
Anyway, yeah, I like the chase sequence as well. I really like that, and also the bit that Rob mentioned with the when Pertwee's forced to march like a marionette on the spot, and you can actually see his eye. He's like got a tear in his eye, I think. You know, this sort of real kind of, this usually rock solid, confident to the point of arrogance doctor is being made to feel, just like a little puppet.
Yeah, I remember that as a child. That really kind of struck me because I was used to this very patriarchal figure that was never scared of anything, and held all his companions under the cape and all the rest of the cliches. But he was always in control and always in power, and that was
the only other time
shocking.
Scared, I think, is Mind of Evil, isn't it? When he's
yeah.
fighting off the flames and past monsters and all of that.
There's a little bit of gurning there that kind of kills.
Yeah.
Whereas here, it feels more genuine. Yeah,
his line when he says when he's utterly beaten, and he says the TARDIS brought me home. That's so moving, isn't it?
Yeah.
Although, John, that chase you were talking about there, I've never known a chase sequence in any movie or TV where it's like pass the baton from one vehicle to another, just like this is, right?
And they're all waiting.
Hovercraft, helicopter, let's go. Everything's just waiting for the next bit, isn't it?
There's a bit where Stuart Fell, I believe, had a hovercraft ridden over him, and they filmed this stunt. They've cut it to look like it's a trick shot. There's the one moment where they actually need to hold the shot, and they cut away at the point where they could have replaced him with a dummy. So
his reaction is so Dick Emery.
The comedy
isn't it?
isn't there, is it? No.
Yeah, it's not a very funny comic moment.
And Chubby Oates going, I'm going home for a lie down. I've had enough. I'm like, yeah, me too. I'm going to bed.
I thought it was Shane Ritchie the first time I saw that.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I thought it was Shane Ritchie.
But, it is too early, I think.
Yeah, probably. Yeah, but then I can't see a thing. It's appalling.
So Spiders is out. We've got 3 more comments on Spiders. Darren thought it's action-packed. He said seeing the Third Doctor in full James Bond mode, giving chase by road, air and water is awesome.
Oh, well, then what do I know? Well done, Darren. Joe Llewellyn says, quite good. Doesn't really drag. Interesting character bits with all the running around.
And Zones of Thought. It's very intriguing. Said Spider still slaps. Have a mandala and mantra, and who needs a vortex manipulator? Okay, so Spiders is the first to fall by the wayside. Joe, you have got Time Warrior and Death to the Daleks left. Which would you like to pick?
I truly cannot believe that the Time Warrior is going to be the last story talked about in this episode.
You're going for Death?
I would like to champion Death to the Daleks, please, which I first watched when I was 7 years old. So I'm watching this through a 7-year-old's eyes. And I'm still 7 years old when I'm watching it now. I think it has a brilliant first episode. Truly atmospheric first episode with great direction from Michael Bryan. In the studio with the lights down and tons of dry ice pumped in and on location. I think it's a very convincingly realized world. And you really feel the sort of oppressive atmosphere of it when the Doctor and Sarah are walking around. There's a great sequence where Sarah is running through the mist, runs into the TARDIS, and she's like, oh, thank God I'm safe. And she's turning the old crank handle, thinking, okay, I'm going to shut the doors. And then you realise that bloody Exelon's in there with her and grabs her foot. And it's genuinely tense and horrific. I know Robert Holmes had input in this story. And I think this was the first story he had real input into. And you can feel that sort of gothic horror starting to creep in. Although I think gothic is an overused term. But you can feel the horror seeping into the story. And it leads up to a Dalek cliffhanger. What more do you want? Fabulous. And the idea of the TARDIS losing all of its power. Terry Nation ain't big on ideas, but they're fun ideas, and the TARDIS being stranded on that planet with no way off. I think it's great. Oh, and sorry, I'm just going to list everything I love about this story. The City of the Exelons. When I was 7 years old, you was never going to see a better special effect than that. With Sarah walking towards it and the beacon going off, fabulous cigarette in the distance. Oh my God, it's amazing. My second reason to champion Death to the Daleks is devious Daleks. Yes, take away their weapons and have them be really devious, although not perhaps as smart as they could be, because when they're coming up with their evil plan, the Doctor and co are about 2 foot over there, where they're all going, well, let's all pretend, we're going to help them out. And even when we get their weapons back, we're still going to help them out. And then they basically turn round and they're literally there right next to them going, all right, Doctor, we're on your side. No, it's really refreshing for Terry Nation to do something different with the Daleks. And I like them using their brains rather than their guns. However, when they do get their guns back, they're given fabulous machine guns. And there's one sequence where they blast down a bunch of Exelons for no reason at all, apart from the fact that they're absolute bastards, which I love. I think the Daleks are really great in this. They're even when they've got all the perineum at the end, they're like, well, we don't need to blow up the planet, but we're going to blow it up anyway because we don't like none of you. They're wonderful. I think the Daleks are great in this. There's a sequence where the Doctor says goodbye to Sarah in this, and it's one of the most intimate scenes you're going to see between a Doctor and a companion in the classic series. He cups her face, he talks to her very gently, she tries to resist, and there's just an unspoken intimacy between the two of them that I really love. Now, I've heard a reading from Lucy McCall, who's a Hamster. She doesn't like that bit at all. She thinks the Doctor's a bit too familiar with her. I think it's really very touching, and it shows how their relationship is deepening as the season goes on, and they get more and more moments like that. And the last reason I want to champion this is because, and you're probably all going to hate this as adults, but as a kid, all of those fabulous, what?
You're not going to say the music. Please, for the love of God, don't say the music.
Oh, no, that's another reason I love this. I'll come to that after this one then. It's those fabulous dangers in the City of the Exelons, which plays out like, Doctor Who's version of the Crystal Maze as you go from one room to the other, the maze of death, the evil light bulbs that drive you crazy.
Oh, I love that. Oh, those video effects.
The school disco of death.
You do not exist. That exists. Oh, it's fabulous. The IKEA flooring of death. When you're 7 years old, all of these dangers. Oh, look at James. He looks very perturbed right now.
I think James is giving it away a little bit.
You've got to remember, I watched the VHS of this, so I wasn't aware it was a cliffhanger until I was.
You can't bring up the IKEA flooring of death as a good point and not expect me to make a face.
I was 7. I was 7.
No
the Daleks go across. There's electric beams everywhere. I sometimes think we forget what it's like to watch Doctor Who as a little kid. And as a little kid, that was just incredible. It was weird. It was weird, deadly floor. I just loved it. And then just the idea that you could give the city a nervous breakdown, by undoing a few bits and pieces. I just loved it. The doors coming up and down and them trying to get out. I genuinely thought they weren't going to make it. I can see as an adult why this is a very trying Doctor Who story, full of cliches and stereotypes and, that dreadful, what's her name? Jill Tarrant. Here she comes, awful. One
of Terry Nation's many Tarrants.
What is it with the name Tarrant? I still don't understand it.
But as a Tarrant too far.
As a child, this was the most excitement I could possibly have. I wore that video out. I love it. I still love it now. It takes me back to being young, and that's why I'm keeping it in.
Fantastic. Should we see what the comments say, Joe? David
I'm scared.
Yeah,
I'm scared.
They're a mixed bag. Let's say mixed bag. David Gillespie Pratt said, what a beige half-hour story. There's a real feeling of it'll do on so many fronts, especially in Terry Nation's unremarkable script. Daleks without the power to kill should have been much more interesting.
I feel sad for him. Michael Storm says, the best for me is without doubt. I'll start again. Michael Storm says, the best for me is without doubt. It may take story beats from Colony in Space and spice them up with games from the annuals, but it is great fun. The Daleks briefly get to be cunning again, since the odds are against them.
Jim Allenby said it might not be everyone's favourite, same as you here, Joe, but I saw this as a kid on VHS, and it's always a go-to comfort story, even the slightly dodgy music. And the silver and black Daleks look magnificent.
Melvin Pena says Arnold Yarrow. Oh, I didn't even mention Belau. Arnold Yarrow as Belau. It's charming and adorable guide to the Exelon City. And Pertwee's closing pronouncement about how there are only 699 wonders left in the universe is a wonderfully bleak antecedent or antitype to Davison's "There should have been another way" from Warriors of the Deep. Man, the reasons are stacking up here, folks.
Well, don't get too excited. Jeff Richardson said, "This is the worst because I can't be asked to care about shooting and yelling and space peril."
May I suggest he's watching the wrong television show then? Aileen Phillips says Belau is great.
Taylor Edwards said, "I love the concept, but it feels like everyone from Terry Nation to John Pertwee is just going through the motions."
Darren McKay says it's like a comfy blanket for me, and that Dalek design has yet to be bettered. Oh, yes.
Ryan McGivern said, "Simple, fun, if daft story, great soundtrack, and an atmospheric feel, through, though the part 3 cliffhanger is pretty dumb."
Gareth Bowley finally says, "Feels so ploddy. The music really doesn't help its pace."
I think we've got to go to James because James just looks like he's lost the will to live with this story.
He looks
no, I haven't. I did enjoy it. And I'm totally with Joe about seeing things as a 7-year-old. I mean, I think Doctor Who should appeal to 7-year-olds, and this really would have done. And it's got an awful lot going for it just from a purely kind of visual perspective. The film sequences are great, and they've got Daleks bursting into flames and toppling off cliffs into muddy lakes. You know, it's full of stuff that I absolutely would have loved as a kid. I suppose I would question whether this approach where the Daleks they're devious, but they're devious in a kind of Doctor Who annual 1966 way, whether that really works with this era of Doctor Who and with the quite mature relationship that has been set up between John Pertwee and the series, but particularly John Pertwee and Elizabeth Sladen. And following on from, I agree, that first episode with the dimly lit TARDIS and that existential horror of, you know, the TARDIS is their only way out, and there's no, you feel her despair. This is her one trip, and this is where Sarah being a passenger rather than a companion is so powerful, because it's like it's her first trip into space, and you can sense her dismay. It's like, is this it? That's why I think his farewell to her is so moving. It's almost like it's an apology. Sorry, I was meant to take you to an amazing place, and look where we've ended up. I agree with all of that. 7-year-old me would have seen that wrinkled flooring and gone, couldn't they at least have made it straight? Couldn't they have?
You couldn't have been cynical at 7, surely.
No, but I think I was critical at 7. I think that I think, like many Doctor Who fans, I was a bit troubled by anything that took me out of the reality. And as a Doctor Who fan, I was pretty exceptional. You know, I certainly never watched Doctor Who for the special effects. I was willing to suspend disbelief, which is why I was so troubled when something just appeared to be a bit sloppy. And that is so clearly a studio set where they haven't really bothered to set it up properly. And I think it's full of things like that. And the whole thing, the whole direction, you know, the Daleks going away and having a loud conversation just next to the Doctor, it feels so lazy. Surely someone could have just turned the camera a bit further so it wasn't so obvious.
That one of those Daleks, hasn't got an operator in it, and no one's even sort of getting out with a stick or anything. One is completely stationary. I'm
fascinated by this. You know, the Daleks, which move so beautifully in the Hartnell stories, did they just not pass this information on? You know, where were the Dalek operators going on? And this is how we do this, and we need to keep this moving to keep it. You know, even from Planet of the Daleks to Death to the Daleks, there's a drop in kind of the quality of Dalek operating, and they bump into stuff and they don't flash their lights properly. The whole thing is this slight air of no one quite cares enough to make it really good, and that troubles me. I wrote down when I was watching it, it's this Terry Nation's most by numbers script. It's sort of, if you had Terry Nation bingo, this would be a winning story, because it's got everything. It's got a series of tests. It's got a space virus. It's got a Tarrant. it's even like there's a point where Galloway is told you're not fit to be leader, and like, what? Where did that come from? We've had no sign that Galloway is a character who shouldn't be entrusted with leadership. And when he does his self-sacrifice, it's almost on his face, like, well, I've got to sacrifice myself because I've been set up as a bad one. So yeah, this is me half-heartedly sacrificing myself.
He's a great character, Galloway.
I disagree, because I don't think there's anything in the writing. I think all of the characters are absolutely kind of two-dimensional.
The bit where Commander Rowton dies, and he says, you're not going to be in command, and then he goes, "Oh, I'm sorry, sir, I couldn't quite hear you." After
it's a good line, but it feels like a line that he's reused from something else. There's nothing that sets him up as that character,
if I'm honest.
Finally, Carey Blyton, right? He's a really interesting composer. Carey Blyton's had this thing where he felt that the music he wrote had to somehow match the concept of the story, which is an interesting idea. So in Doctor Who and the Silurians, he thought, well, they're ancient creatures from beneath the ground. I need to find an ancient instrument to represent them, which is why he uses a shawm, which I'd say I think that's quite an effective score. It's a weird score, but then what score from that era of Who is not
discordant now, isn't it?
It's really I think it works in an odd way. This one is him going, well, the Daleks are fed through a ring modulator, so I need to feed my clarinet through a ring modulator, and that will make it sound like Dalek music. And I just think it's wrong-headed. I totally understand that if you've grown up with it and there's a nostalgia factor, that it's going to work for you in a way.
That was basically my only card, James. That was my only card. To defend
Joe was grasping at that point.
You only have to compare it to the music that Dudley Simpson writes a year later for Genesis of the Daleks to see what real menacing Dalek music really sounds like. And Carey Blyton doesn't come close. And it's not even like, I don't think he wants to come close. I think he's trying to do something conceptual. And I'm not saying there's not some quality to his music. I just feel like he'd be better placed working with Ken Russell on a documentary or something.
What about the Welsh choir?
Okay, I quite like that music, but I was slightly unnerved because I watched Topsy Turvy recently, and the head priest talks in the same voice as Jim Broadbent doing W.S. Gilbert. So no, I think that choir music actually works quite effectively. It comes from that slightly horror inflected part of the story, which ultimately doesn't really deliver because they just sort of run away from them. And
it's the adventure game by the end.
It is, yeah. And I agree about the weird room. There's some real weirdness there, but then there are the two figures where they haven't really bothered to come up with a costume, so they've just sort of wrapped them in toilet roll and they have to do it. Do you know what I mean? Like everything, there were great ideas peppered amongst the episodes, but I feel like ultimately there's not the will to realize that Terry Nation is for someone who early on in Doctor Who was sort of entrusted as a reliable pair of hands who would turn up the goods. There are so many Terry Nation scripts where I think, how did you think they were going to do all of this?
And respected producers going, yeah, we'll make this.
Yeah,
we'll throw some money at this.
So I'm taking it's a no, James. For
you. It's a no for me.
If you said yes after all that, I would have been very surprised. I've got to hear what John's got to say.
Well, it's another yes from me. I mean, I love it. I love all the, like you said, Doctor Who's designed to be, enjoyed as a kid, and it's got horror movie overtones. It's got all these tests that they've got to go through, and that is exactly the sort of thing that I look for in Doctor Who. Some of the characters are a bit lackluster. I mean, Galloway, like you said, is just he's a bit one-dimensional. He's always going on about his breakaway groups. I mean, it's like do the Exelons come up with extra chocolate on their biscuits or something? I don't care. Jill Tarrant, other bloke who's got the personality of a hula hoop, the other commander guy.
You're not talking about the great John Abineri, are you?
Oh, he's wonderful.
No, I've got something to say about John Abineri in a minute.
No, John Abineri is actually excellent. And it's a shame that he's used as target practice so early on in part 2.
He is wasted, isn't he?
Yeah,
I don't know what they've got
I
there.
was
He's
very
around for
disturbed
like
as a child how he seemed to die in a mess of mash and peas. Did you see it all over the place in the spaceship when they kidnap him? No, just me? Okay. It's all over the floor. Sorry, John, continue.
Oh right, no, sorry, I'm with you now. Yes, yeah. I mean, I don't know. I mean, maybe the Exelons had a, like a, maybe they were really hungry or something. They were looking for something better than, instant mash and, stale peas. I don't know.
Marrow fat
Their
peas, yeah.
food is rank. So yeah, there's that, and yeah, the music doesn't really work. Having said that, there are some quite nice cues in part one. And I like the way that there's absolutely no music for the first 10 minutes because of, the power's gone. And all of a sudden, the TARDIS doesn't feel like a place of safety anymore. It actually feels dangerous. You've got the Exelon actually invading, and you see it from the Exelon's point of view, which is one thing that Michael E. Bright is very good at, and he'd do much better, even better, in Robots of Death. It's quite kind of voyeuristic the way you see it from, the baddie's point of view and the way it attacks Sarah. And of course, he'd do that again in Robots of Death, and it's even more kind of graphic.
Do you know why he did it that way?
Hmm?
Do you know why he did it that way?
No.
He said he just didn't have enough set to shoot in, so he had to shoot it
Oh,
from
right.
the Exelon's
Oh,
point of view to go at Sarah Jane.
Needs must. Yeah. Well, whatever he's.
But it works. Yeah,
great
it
choice.
works.
Yeah, yeah. And also, he's really good with video effects. The bit where, when he says, you do not exist, etc., etc. I really like the video distortion for that, which they nick from Top of the Pops. There's something, that's one thing I really like about 1970s Doctor Who is all those weird kind of video effects that they include. So I think there's an awful lot to recommend it. Oh yeah, and the screams at the end when the city melts. That's quite just jarring, I think. Very strange. I used to think it was Michael Wisher, but apparently it's Jill Tarrant, or rather the girl who plays Jill Tarrant, Michael E. Bryant, and the guy who plays Hula Hoop Man doing the screams. So yeah, but all things considered, I would keep it in.
You're right
Oh,
about the
I've got the
silence at the
casting.
start. That's great. But if the best thing you can say about a score is that it's not there for the first 10 minutes.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, go back to that. Yeah, yeah. The cue, yeah, I'm thinking of, there's a really nice cue when it cuts from the Doctor being attacked by Exelons to Sarah waking up in the cell. There's a lovely, soft little bit of music. And if he'd done it like that all the way through, it would have been so much better than the Mr. Ben theme tune.
Don't you love the bit, when she's towards the end of episode 2, where Sarah's in the cave and it's like da 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 da
Yeah,
da da.
yeah,
I love all of
yeah.
that, mind you.
Yeah.
7 years old again.
But I've got to counter that, Joe, with when we get 3 blind mice when the Doctor comes back from having been attacked by the root. Has the Doctor survived? Hasn't he? Sarah's terrified, and we get 3 blind mice. Oh,
He's nothing if not original, and he's not original.
I've never heard that before in Doctor Who, so true originality. Okay, so I've got the casting vote on this one.
Go with your inner child, Roz.
There are good and bad. Everything I've written down for my reasons, I find good, but then I find bad. So there is some really original stuff here. I like the stuff about the city, the fact that the city's got a root system. We hear that the Exelons have traveled across the universe and inspired the Aztecs temples. That's really original. The fact that the city cast its inhabitants out, and one group worships it and the other group wants to destroy it. There's some really new and interesting ideas in there for Terry Nation. The games on the floor and the games through the city, that's new at this stage, and obviously we get it later on. We get it in Pyramids of Mars, we get it again in 5 Doctors. So there are new stuff here, but you're also mixed with one hell of a lot, as I think James rightly pointed out, of Terry Nation tropes. Space plague, when John Pertwee talks about you and your space chums, that was the nadir. What does Capaldi say in Sleep? Just put the word space in front of anything. But space chums was pretty much.
Terry Nation did that for about 4 decades.
Oh my goodness. But we've got the good old gravel pits. This was originally written to be a jungle, but Terry Nation was told, no, it can't be a jungle
We
because you've
just
just
did
had
a
a jungle.
jungle. Yeah.
Exactly. So have a gravel pit because that's really original. So yeah, there's that. The characters for me really drag it down. I mean, Jill Tarrant, she is in the Marine Space Corps. How did that woman get into the Marine Space Corps? She's awful. I mean, the Joe, I don't know. I can't even bring myself to speak to you in future. You recommended the cliffhanger of episode 1, which is possibly one of the nadirs of Doctor Who. They all run out to see the saucer landing. They all look in completely different
Here she
directions.
comes.
Yeah, but they're all looking in completely different directions. John Abineri, who is usually a solid performance, has a terrible delivery of "wait, you can't" as the Daleks come out. I mean, and then the music of
No, because
Kerry Blyton.
it ends on a Dalek firing. So it's the ultimate. How are
Yeah,
they going to
it
get
ends
out
on
of this?
about a 3-minute shot of a Dalek firing, clearly not successfully firing, and then it cuts to John Pertwee, who we hold for another 5 minutes, clearly
John Pertwee
not being
holding
shot.
the mess that is Jill Tarrant as she crumbles into his arm. It's very stock. I do like Galloway. I think Duncan Lamont is very good in his role. He was apparently quite a star, and his name was kind of put out there as being the lead for this story or the lead guest star for this. Bellal is great character. Love Bellal. Atmosphere again. You see the atmosphere is up and down. You're right. The early shots with the stuff on film and all the dry ice and the TARDIS landing, that's really
The sound
atmospheric.
effects are great as well. The
They are,
planetary sound effects and.
but then you go to the area where the Dalek spaceship lands, and it's so, you know what, I can't knock Doctor Who for showing
It's
set.
a studio, isn't it?
It's the juxtaposition between the two. It just doesn't
That
work. You've got
dreadful CSO shot of the interior of the spaceship.
I mean, I love the chanting music. I think that's really atmospheric, but then you've got the rest of the music. And I just think for every good, there's too much bad. So I'm sorry, guys. It's a no for me. It's going to exit. I'm with you, James. It's leaving the competition.
Devastated. Honestly, that might be a Hoover attachment, but the way it screamed like that, 7-year-old me was terrified. I could even see the wire and I was still scared.
So we are left weirdly with the Time Warrior.
I think it's the strongest in the season in a lot of ways. I think it's a brilliant script, and I've seen this one quite a lot because it's one of the ones that was out on VHS early and which I borrowed and watched again and again and again. So I know it pretty well, and every time I'm struck by how clever and how subtle this writing is, how clever it is that Irongron and Lynx are basically the same character, and they both think the other is uncivilized for different reasons. The comics, I mean, it's basically a comedy script with some pretty high stakes. And I think John Pertwee and Elizabeth Sladen throw themselves into that and play it absolutely for real. But it's really funny. It is kind of, we were talking about this season being a bit of a soft reboot and a bit of a fresh feel. I mean, they go back in history, and it's Doctor Who and an exciting yarn with some knights and some peasants, and it's got all the kind of cliches, but they're all quite well drawn characters, and the dialogue is so funny and so well written, and the turns of phrase you get in there, it's such a quotable script. I think that I'm just going to be stating the obvious, but of all these stories, I think the design is the strongest. I think it's a pretty convincing medieval England, and clearly at the center of it is the Sontaran design. You've got this incredibly alien looking spaceship, so simple but so jarring in that context, and the design of the Sontaran is rightly lauded as one of the great things to come out of classic Doctor Who. It's a brilliant design, a brilliantly alien, and yet it is still a punchline. The joke is that he takes off his helmet and his head is the same shape, which it's a brilliant joke as well. I could go on, but I want to let other people talk, because otherwise I'm just going to be listing I'm just going to start quoting it and going through it from episode 1 onwards. But I can't see how you wouldn't enjoy this story. It's a decent yarn, and I think it's perfectly well realized. not perfectly realized, but I think there's nothing in this that gives me kind of any trouble. I know that Barry Letts felt the special effects were a little bit disappointing. As the child who would have spotted the wrinkles in the rug of doom in Death of the Daleks, I thought that castle exploding was as good as the explosion in the Demons. Didn't have a problem with it at all. Great score as well. Dudley Simpson again, just lovely stuff.
Should we go to the comments, Joe?
Yes. Okay, start us off.
Yeah, so Lucy McCall said, "It's my favourite for the historical setting, the introduction of Sontaran, and best of all, the introduction of Sarah Jane as an intelligent companion with an inquiring mind, something that carries on in Dinosaurs."
Paul Quinn says, Holmes's second truly great script. Ooh, I wonder what the first is. Lynx is that rarity, a monster that is also an individual character. The Pertwee run is very good on that.
Michael Storm said, "I'm prepared for some aggressive tutting, but the Time Warrior is the worst of the season.
Ooh.
Direction is incredibly flat. The story is laid out straight away, robbing any mystery to the events. Other than Lynx and Ingron, the supporting characters are dull, and Pound Shop Tim Brooke Taylor is annoying." I presume he means Professor Rubish.
Harsh. Joe Llewellyn says, a fantastic introduction to one of the great companions and monsters. It's a double
Taylor
whammy.
Edwards. Yep, Taylor Edwards said one of the best home scripts.
Michael Donahue says, Sarah is great from the off. Lynx is a great villain, and it's good to see Pertwee in a historical for once.
Rich says the Time Warrior is the best story. It's introduced the Sontarans and Gallifrey and is a strong start for the character Sarah. The story is also a great jumping on point for new viewers. The pairing of Pertwee and Sladen is hugely underrated.
And the last word goes to Tony Filer, who says, hard to beat Time Warrior on any level. Stands tall amongst the best of who.
Who was it? Who said the characters were dull?
Is that Michael Storm?
It was.
I mean, you've got. I think Blood Axe is as good a character as Irongron, and as a double act, they are absolutely brilliant together. I think his earnestness, his being even thicker than Irongron, is a brilliant joke and brilliantly written. I think that Edward of Wessex and Lady Eleanor are brilliant characters. You've got June Brown there, for goodness sake, being absolutely, clearly wearing the trousers in that relationship.
She just needed the fag hanging out.
Absolutely.
She's great, isn't she?
She almost
It's
does.
strange you couldn't have done the lines in the Dot Cotton voice. That just would have been.
So she says, you mean you're going to brew up a potion to slay the dog?
You're
no.
going to do a potion to slay Monaco.
Oh, so yeah, it could have been better there. It could have been better.
Yeah.
And a word of praise also for Meg, the greatest wench Doctor Who has ever seen. In that wig, it's like someone in the costume department said, "Shall we comb this wig?" No. Let's just should we put it on straight? No. Let's put it on and see what she does with it. And she runs with the wig.
It's been in a cupboard since an unearthly child.
Yes.
The way she chews out that, was it? Oh, my dear, I'll give you bread and cheese, but you'll have to earn it. Like, it's great. Come on, then, John. What do you think?
Well, I like it as well. I'm sorry, it's I'm finding positives in everything here, so it's probably not.
We should have had you on a new series episode, shouldn't we?
No,
I'm not getting him on anything with Murray Gold from what he said.
no. Well, going back to the whole reboot thing, it's strange for as a couple of fans that think that Pertwee's phoning it in, because I think he's really energized in this. It's almost kind of like he feels refreshed by the whole new challenge, which is weird because they filmed it straight after the Green Death, which was when just after Casey Manning left. I think it was actually a couple of days before Roger Delgado was sadly killed in the road accident. I think it's 4 days before. But John Pertwee feels really energized, and there are just so many funny jokes in this. And I think one of them is like the bit when Rubish says, John Pertwee goes, "Oh, I've got to go off and find a young girl." And he goes, "A young girl? I thought he was too old for that sort of thing." That's just pricey. It's just the delivery as well.
That is the dirtiest joke to that point in Doctor Who.
Yeah. Of course, these days they make a meal out of it, and Captain Innuendo will just make a song and dance back. But here it's quite subtle and it's quite innocent and it's more funny, I think. The I really like the setting of it. It's quite unusual for the Doctor actually to go back in time. Going back to what somebody said about Tim Brooke Taylor, they just done the Goodies episode Camelot a couple of weeks before, which is, it's sort of a similar kind of feel to it. But there's a lot of fun as well in this one. It's quite surprisingly quite light-hearted because the John Pertwee years are normally quite serious and quite reserved. But this has got a lot of welcome humour in it, and I think it's kind of revitalised John Pertwee. Who's also really funny is the robot knight when he pretends to dupe Ingron and he fights against him. And he goes, "Isn't that a big unsporting old chap?" And it's just so many funny lines in it. And also what Jamie said about the exploding all of it, I don't mind that. I actually think the CGI version looks rubbish compared to it. It looks like some really cheap computer game that came out in 1995. It's nothing wrong with the original at all. I think
that makes me so sad. That documentary where Barry Letts sits there and says, "And at last, I'm going to be able to watch this with the special effects it deserves."
Oh, and that CGI is appalling, isn't it? Yeah.
Good.
Yeah, it's just rubbish. I mean, God, just leave it as it is. To be honest, I feel like it's kind of heresy watching it with CGI effects. Not just this one, but any of the ones that have got redone effects. I mean, just it's what TV was at the time. Take it or leave it. And in this case, I take it. Completely.
Excellent.
The story, so it's good, and I'm nominated to keep it.
I'm going to keep it in as well. Yeah, I think it's a great story. I mean, the fact that the Sontarans was such a well-realized race, the fact they're still around today and we're still talking about them and they're in the current series, I think just is testament to the fact that Holmes came up with quite a unique, strong concept for a villain. The design is absolutely superb. I don't think actually it's ever been bettered. I think the original Lynx and Kevin Lindsay's performance is just on point. And I think that's I say the fact that it's still around today says it was a really good design. The setting, like you say, this is Pertwee's only full pseudo-historical, and I think he really revels in that. And Holmes definitely revels in it because it gives him opportunity to go full blast with that language and use as plummier language as he can possibly get. I'm going to call out the scene in the kitchen in episode 3 between Pertwee and Sladen, which I think is just a lovely scene in the history of Doctor Who, with Sarah coming to kind of terms with the fact that Doctor's alien and he's a Time Lord, and it's just so playful and delightful. And Pertwee says, "Oh yes, Time Lords, they're a load of intergalactic ticket inspectors." It's just lovely dialogue, and there's loads of quotable lines in this. A straight line, what is it? A straight line is the shortest distance between 2 points, but it's by no means the most interesting. I'm serious about what I do, but not necessarily about how I do it. I mean, there's so many quotable lines in this, isn't there? It's it's comedy. It's comedy through and through. Sometimes I feel it's just missing. I'm not sure what it is. It's really hard to quantify, but it just feels like it's missing one small element to kind of take it into the greatest echelons. But yeah, generally it's pretty damn solid, although I would ask what Sontarans have got against robots, because the robot in this and then the robot in the Sontaran experiment, they have the most appalling robots. How are they doing so well in the war against the Rutons? Because they can't make a robot to save their lives. And finally, obviously got to mention Elizabeth Sladen in her debut. She just hits the ground running from day one. She's just, I think I mentioned before, she's incredibly naturalistic. The scene where she gets dragged off by Ingron's men, and she's just shouting, "Get off!" It's just really natural. And it feels quite different to companions that we've had in the past. When the Doctor exasperates and she's like, "Oh, I could murder a cup of tea." It's just, you just feel she's real, she's human, and she's lovely. So yeah, for lots and lots of reasons, I'm going to put this one through.
I'm also going to put this through. I mean, I couldn't argue against any of what any of you are saying. It's just really fucking funny, this, isn't it? It's so funny. And I think Doctor Who can cover a multitude of sins if it's funny. But it's not actually committing any sins. It's beautifully designed. It's got terrific location work. I think Alan Bromley's direction is a lot better. A lot of people say it's very pedestrian. I think he shoots brilliantly on location, and he's not too bad in the studio either. It's well lit. The costumes are great. The music was great, as James said. It gives it real pace, but it is just so funny. Unfortunately, you've stolen one of the three lines I was going to quote
Sorry,
as to why this is so great. Galactic ticket inspectors. Oh, I could murder a cup of tea. It just brings it all down to the domestic level. But my favourite Sarah Jane line is, why don't you take off that ridiculous gear and go home to your butcher's shop? I love that bit. And of course, in episode 4, where she just goes, "Look at that great spider," which is very funny again. It is just an incredibly witty script. It's sort of between this and Carnival of Monsters, I think, for Holmes's funniest script. This one might win out. But yeah, it's a win. It's a great start to the season. It's a brilliant introduction of Sarah Jane and the Sontarans. And it's just a great historical romp as well. And we haven't had enough history in Doctor Who for a long time.
Oh, and lest we forget, it's like you're living in the Middle Ages.
Oh, yeah, how did I forget that one?
Yeah.
Oh, man. Oh, it's funny. It was very
Brilliant. So we get to the end of round 1. Round 2, you'll be glad to know, is much shorter.
Round 2 is
Traditionally,
very short, all right?
Traditionally, we do it in about 3 seconds, yeah. We've knocked 2 stories out. So the first one we lost, unbelievably, was Planet of the Spiders. And then Death to the Daleks also went by the wayside. So we're left with Time Warrior, Dinosaurs, and Peladon. So what we're going to do here is I've got a random generator. I'm going to spin it, pit 2 stories against each other, and we've just got to decide which is our favourite. So the hamster
John
wheel is
looks
spinning.
pained that he's going to have to do this.
The first one is Invasion of the Dinosaurs, and Invasion of the Dinosaurs will be playing the Time Warrior.
Oh, shit.
No one wanted that to happen, did they?
No,
Oh.
that means Peladon's in the final. So pretty much whatever wins this is going
I
to
feel
win.
partially responsible. Sorry.
I'm going to choose the Time Warrior. It's shorter. It's funnier. I think on the whole, it's better realised. Yeah, so the Time Warrior for me.
I'm going Invasion of the Dinosaurs because I think there's a bit more to it. It's got something more to say. Yeah, it's making more of a point. 6 probably does drag a little bit. We could have lost the chase sequence for half of episode 5, but it's got a lot more to say. So I'm going with Invasion of the Dinosaurs. James and John.
Very tense, isn't it? When they release a special edition of Invasion of the Dinosaurs and edit unit out of episode 1, and then edit all the spaceship scenes together so that we don't know that Sarah actually is just on a fake spaceship from the moment she's on it.
And they need to edit out the blood that's on her head because that's still fresh, even though it's 3 months later.
Yeah, or put a hat on her or something, a CGI hat or something, because they probably would have done. Oh, yeah, yeah. Then I think Dinosaurs will be in with a chance, but there are too many problems with it. And as I say, I think it's just slightly trading on former glories. It's not the best deserted London story. It's not the best Doctor Who goes into the underground story. So I am voting for the Time Warrior.
I'm sorry, I'm going to go with Invasion of Dinosaurs because I think there's a lot to recommend there. I really like the atmosphere of it. I like the intrigue, I like the plot, I like the twists and turns, and I think it proves that Doctor Who was still willing to try something different at this point, and actually have one of the unit team go rogue. It's actually kind of like, the beginning of the end, I think, of the Pertwee years. It's actually seeing that team break up. It's actually seeing it break up on the screen as well. So, sorry guys, Invasion of the Dinosaurs for me.
Okay, well, because we've got another story, let's park that for the time being, and let's see. You never know what might happen. So we've got Invasion of the Dinosaurs, and obviously it's got to be Monster of Peladon. So Peladon versus Dinosaurs. I'm not going to be that contrary. I'm going to go for Dinosaurs.
Dinosaurs.
James.
Oh, look, Head says Peladon actually, but Heart says Dinosaurs.
Dinosaurs as well.
Okay, so Peladon falls into 3rd place. So we've got a battle between Time Warrior and Dinosaurs.
Oh man, no
We've
one's
got
gonna
to-
budge.
There's got to be some concession somewhere. Is there anyone sitting on the fence?
Let me really, I'm going to lay into dinosaurs now. One of the problems with dinosaurs that is writ large from the beginning is that every single guest character is a traitor, and it becomes so obvious. And it's not even like one of them's left until the final episode. They're all revealed by the end of part 3. We know that they're all traitors, and it pretty much is kind of like, well, okay, the only person left who could be a traitor is the Brigadier. But when the twist is that the Brigadier is not a traitor, you know that the storytelling has taken a wrong turn somewhere.
I think although I went for dinosaurs, there is more padding in dinosaurs than there is in Time Warrior. I'll concede. I'll concede.
Oh yes.
I'll go Time Warrior.
Do you know
Sorry,
what?
John.
There you go.
I knew
Never
as
mind.
I'm going to be a
well.
turncoat.
I don't know how. I knew it was going to come down to Invasion of the Dinosaurs and the Time Warrior for that season.
And Time Warrior takes it. So we've got a winner. I'm not going to say clear winner, but we've got a winner for season 11. Thank you very much, gentlemen.
Well, we found nice things to say about all 5 of the stories, though.
We
didn't
did.
Absolutely.
In fact, the passionate defense of Monster of Peladon was nothing. I didn't think I'd see that coming a mile off. So thank you for that.
I surprised myself, actually. So
Indeed. Thank you all for your views and opinions. Next podcast, it's season 18. So we're through to a time of lots of beards and lots of entropy and lots of technobabble. James, John, would you like to direct people to your social media or plug anything that you're involved in at the moment?
Well, you can find me on the artist formerly known as Twitter at James Lark. And I have a podcast of my own. It's not been updated very recently, but there are some more episodes planned for 2024. It's called Neurotic Literature. Neurotic, not erotic. Don't search for that unless, well,
I was already looking. I'm glad you made the distinction there.
If you're prepared to live with the nightmares. But no, neurotic literature. It's short stories, and they've been described as what P.G. Wodehouse would have written if he'd written horror.
Oh, excellent.
It sounds
most intriguing. John.
Well, I still call it Twitter. If you can spell it, then it's John Bensahlia at Twitter, and that's it.
No, that's not it. Excuse me. John has written a range of fabulous Doctor Who review books called Perpetual Outsider, of which I have read all of them several times. They're in separate volumes. They're available as ebooks. Check them out on Amazon. He's a very smart, very funny writer. Why didn't you mention those?
Thank you. Oh, I forgot. £1.80 each. They're £1.80 each. Kindle.
They are such witty reviews. I absolutely adore. I love your writing. Perpetual Outsider. Go and find them.
Brilliant. So all it remains is us to thank so much James and John for being 2 superb guests for our third.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you very much.
You are most welcome, and you're both most welcome back again for a future instalment. And that's it. That's it for tonight. So thank you for listening. Joe, are you ready this time?
What I've got to say
Are you ready this time?
Yeah, I'm ready.
Fantastic. Okay. So thank you for listening. And until next time,
Keep listening.
Good night.